This video is sponsored by Adept Roll. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the Best Armies in Warhammer 40k, the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from the past weekend's large events and talk about what's currently winning. And this being a holiday weekend, for those of you who are into that sort of thing, it is a little bit lighter on the slate than we've had over the last couple of weeks, which is good for me because I am tired. That said, we did see a couple of large events go down, major-sized events, including the Glasshammer Major at Birmingham and the Wet Coast GT, and we saw some really cool results from brand new factions. The fact that we had fewer results this week means that I'm going to be delving into some smaller events that normally would fly under the radar for this series, but I'm going to be taking a peek at those this time around, and we see some results from new factions like Emperor's Children, this being one of the first outings that the faction has with their codex being released shortly. So let's talk about a metagame breakdown and go through exactly what is winning. First off, those Emperor's Children went undefeated at both the Gladiator Invitational Easter as well as the Home Nation Singles. Both of these events were won by a coterie of the Conceited Army. That's the detachment that's probably coming out as the faction frontrunner for the Emperor's Children faction since its codex has been released. Now, a little bit of an unfortunate thing for the Emperor's Children codex that we'll probably see moving on into the future is that because the codex was pre-released before its official street date, we've had about a month of play with the army, even though it is now just coming onto the tournament scene. So the army has mostly been sussed out. We don't really have that discovery period that we do for most new factions that we get to talk about on the series. The coterie of the Conceited build is pretty much locked in. There is a lot of variance within that of particular unit types, but the faction is relatively small. It's going to feel a lot like World Eaters, where they're going to have one or two build archetypes that we're going to be seeing most often, and that's kind of where they'll stick. We may see a little bit of play with some of the other detachments from some very skilled players, but I think 90% of the time we're going to be seeing this coterie of the Conceited Army see some play. But we'll talk about that momentarily. Astra Militarum also had a pretty good weekend, taking down the Dark Sphere April, as well as going undefeated at the Wet Coast GT. That GT was over 140 players, a big major level event, and so it had multiple undefeated players, including Orks as well. The Glasshammer Birmingham was taken down by Blood Angels. Josh Roberts has returned with Space Marines and taken Blood Angels now post their nerf, no longer Bloodless Angels. We are back to the faction proper. Space Marines still doing well, however, regardless of that, also going undefeated at the GothCon Open using Deathwatch. However, I should mention that this was using a differential scoring, WTC style scoring metric, so ties are really easy in that format, and this GothCon Open was won by an XO and one Deathwatch list. Aeldari took down the Nerd Bar Spring GT. The Hellstorm Wargaming All-Stars April was taken down by Tyranids, and we also saw another XO1 result at a smaller event, the Red Dragon Open, which was won by Adeptus Custodes. Now, if you want to watch any of this coverage, it was a little bit slim pickings for event coverage this weekend. However, you can watch Wargames Live, who streamed the Nerd Bar GT. If there are any other live streams that you have found over the course of the weekend, go ahead and throw them down in the comments there as always, so we can get more eyes on their coverage. If you want to play some 40k, I just announced a brand new installment of my Young Bloods series. These are new player-oriented tournaments. They just run 3 rounds and offer a raffle prize at the end. I'll drop a link in the video description for where you can register for that. There are links there as well to my Discord server where the event will be being run. At the time of recording, that one's going to start in just about 2 weeks, so you better get on it. And with that, let's move over to talking about some lists just after a word from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Adept Roll. Are you tired of guessing whether or not your 40k game plan will pay off? I'm happy to introduce Adept Roll, a dice probability calculator usable on basically any mobile device. For those who haven't used these tools before, they offer a very simple plug-in system where you can input your weapon stats versus defending stats and calculate the probabilities of certain dice results or the average amount of damage that you should expect from a particular attack sequence. Adept Roll is a mobile app designed to give you precise calculations on probabilities for these attacks. It saves you the time and effort of doing the complex math and allows you to focus more heavily on actually outplaying your opponent on the battlefield. I myself myself use these tools quite often in my games of 40k, especially if I'm identifying 2 lines of play.
Curious what the math hammer is. According to this, the average damage is 3.
Adept Roll also features profile imports from both Rosterizer and New Recruit, allowing you to import your unit and attack profiles quicker and easier for faster calculations on the fly. So take control of your 40k battles with more powerful dice insight, and download Adept Roll for free on iOS or Android by following the links down in the video description. Now, we're going to start over here in Stockport, England, and talk about the Home Nations Singles event. This was only 18 players, so relatively small in terms of GTs, but obviously attached to the Home Nations team event. The event was won by Matt Robertson, who, as I mentioned before, was playing Emperor's Children. Now, as I talked about, this list was won using the coterie of the Conceded Detachment. Now, let's delve in and talk about exactly what this detachment does and why it is so strong. First off, the detachment has a little bit of a weird, unique mechanic, the Pledges to Slaanesh. Essentially, the player bids a number of kills that they believe they're going to get at the start of each battle round. If they are able to achieve those kills, a number of enemy units equal to their pledge is destroyed by the end of that battle round. They will gain whatever their bid was in pledge points. If they don't meet it, however, their warlord will take damage. If your warlord is killed, you can no longer make new pledges. The pledge points then unlock permanent abilities for your army. This starts as reroll 1s to hit and can advance into reroll 1s to wound, but can get absolutely insane once you start getting higher numbers of pledge points, including 5-up critical hits on both shooting and melee attacks, as well as both lethal and sustained hits in melee, making the entire army towards the late game become ruthlessly efficient. Combo that with a couple of pretty solid stratagems, and the army is fairly effective. Now, what are we taking in this one? I'm going to pull up data sheets here, but I do apologize. They're going to be the absolutely cursed versions I have from the original leaks so far, because I don't have any better ones to use currently, so just bear with me, I guess. Now, the army is playing, I think, what is going to be and end up being a pretty classic combination of Emperor's Children characters that includes 2 winged demon princes. One of them has Pledge of Eternal Servitude. That's going to allow him to regenerate once he's killed on a successful leadership test, so a little bit worse than like a 2+ regeneration ability, but it is on a big, relatively tough to kill character, so when it does go off, it is fairly effective. Those winged demon princes are just insanely efficient profiles by themselves. They're super fast. They don't hit extremely hard in melee, but obviously once you start unlocking those pledge abilities, you can actually make them hit fairly reasonably. They also have a -1 damage effect built in, and to deal mortal wounds on the charge, they roll a number of dice equal to their remaining wounds count, and they'll deal mortal wounds on a 4+. So the average is somewhere around 5 mortal wounds on whatever they impact if they are at full wounds at the time that they charge. So 2 winged demon princes has a pretty reasonable chance at sort of tag teaming a larger vehicle. They can also follow up after things like Noise Marines have shot at something and kill it fairly reliably, or they can start to solo stuff as the pledges start to stack up. Now, in terms of soloing things, the characters that will actually do some soloing are the Lord Exultants. These guys are incredibly powerful melee characters. They're basically Space Marine captains for the faction. They give you a permanent lethal hits on their attached unit. They're coming in with a Lash and Phoenix Power Spear, which is a Strength 7 AP2 2-damage melee attack, and then they have a once per game ability to give themselves +1 AP and +3 attacks. That won't affect their Lash. Their Lash is locked into 4 additional attacks because extra attack weapons cannot have their attack characteristic modified. However, their Phoenix Power Spear goes to 8 attacks, wounding basically the entire game on 4s if you're charging, and with rerolls available either through the detachment ability or through infractor squads. Last and certainly not least, we have a Lord Cacophonous with Pledge of Unholy Fortune. That is a Fate's Messenger style ability. It allows him to turn one of the hit or wound rolls for his units, or saving throws even, into a 6. He also grants sustained hits to his unit, so he's going to be firing outside of a Noise Marine unit with a Blastmaster, a 3 damage ranged attack. One of those attacks that missed will then turn into a 6, which will sustain. So you can get a lot of additional value out of this guy when he's attached in with those Noise Marines, which is pretty solid. These guys will also be benefiting from the reroll 1s to hit hit once any units have been killed and pledged for Slaanesh, so they have a greater chance at converting those attacks into those sustained hits. Last and certainly not least, we have Lucius the Eternal, who I believe has been selected as the Army's Warlord. Importantly, he's in there because he's good as a lone operative character. He doesn't really need to start the game in a transport or start in reserve in order to get his value, and he has a baked-in feel no pain. So if you ever fail pledges, he can absorb that damage and has a chance to shake it. So he's good just standing on the table. He's good in a melee mirror match, which as players are picking up Emperor's Children is probably going to happen pretty often, especially since I think we're staring down the barrel of World Eaters basically right after this. So we are going to be in a melee metagame for a while, and Lucius the Eternal having fight first when he is a lone character by himself is incredibly strong, plus he can absorb those wounds if you do fail your pledges, which is very nice. We then have a bunch of battle line units. The Emperor's Children battle line units are incredible. 3 units of Infractors, 1 big unit of 10, as well as 2 units of 5. The big unit of 10 allows you to do cool stuff with combat slingshots. I talked about those in my recent video, but you can do things like use them to manipulate the position and the charge moves of your Lord Exultants, get the unit into an enemy's screen, and swing the Lord Exultant into something big and scary, and then blow them up. The Infractors are essentially assault intercessors with Scout, which is just pure upside. They get wound rerolls when targeting enemies on objectives, and as you can imagine, on that really powerful Lord Exultant character, he's going to be able to do a ton of damage. These guys are a real mainstay of the Codex right now. From there, we have 2 units of Tormentors. These are largely just tactical Marines, I guess, but they have infiltration and obsec, so a little bit better. They're rocking plasma guns and melta guns. The big benefit here is that they can start out in the front of the table. They can screen out enemy movement blockers, which is huge. They can threaten objective secure on the top of the first turn, which is going to force your opponent to come in and fight you, which you can then just kill to gain pledge tokens, pledge points, which is great. And on top of that, they also have a pretty reasonable sort of handful of damage with 2 special weapons in the squad, plus a special melee weapon on the unit champion as well. So just a nice unit to have around. Almost all lists are going to take 2 or 3 of these. From there, we have 3 units of Noise Marines, all of these equipped with 2 Blastmasters. These are kind of like melee units with extra steps. They have an 18-inch range gun instead of the long threat range in melee that most of these units are going to be projecting. However, the big benefit that Noise Marines have is that they get to engage with enemies without having to actually get to melee with them. So if your opponent is body blocking you, is screening you, or is set up to heroically intervene, fight first, or do any sort of stuff to your stuff that's going to come in and play with them aggressively, the Noise Marines can take care of that. They are only 18-inch range, but the army plays so aggressively that's not usually such a bad thing. And once they start to get reroll hits and wounds of 1, these guys become very efficient. Obviously, the unit with the attached Lord Cacophonous goes absolutely crazy because these guys are getting potentially 5-up critical hits plus sustained hits plus an automatic critical from his enhancement plus reroll hit rolls of 1. So the amount of damage from the 4 sonic blasters plus the 6 shots from the screamer pistols on the Cacophonous himself plus the 2 blastmasters is immense. And especially if you're not shooting into stuff that either has a great armor save that is going to blank your relatively low AP or stuff that doesn't have a super high toughness value, these guys really want to attack sort of mid-rate stuff like T5, T9, light vehicles or medium infantry. That's really what they want to be shooting at. If they're shooting at that kind of stuff, they're going to absolutely blitz it and they're going to make their points back many times and then force you to come and fight them, which obviously is just going to bring you into the waiting teeth of the Emperor's Children army. From there, we have 3 rhinos. The Emperor's Children rhinos are able to advance and disembark units, so they can advance and disembark Noise Marines, which is great, and allow them to shoot without penalty, not even having to worry about the Thrill Seeker's ability, which is awesome. And they're also going to gain Scout if they are embarked by only Infractors and Lord Exultants. The Lord Exultants actually gain Scout if they're attached to the Infractor unit, so they will be able to confer that to their dedicator transports, and they can act as kind of an alpha strike. You can scout the entire unit 6 inches forward, disembark 3, move 7, advance, charge. They can potentially be in your deployment zone on turn 1 fighting you. So this is, I think, essentially what we should expect to see out of Emperor's Children, at least for the immediate foreseeable future. It may be that we are waiting for some army FAQs to come down the pipeline that may change how this army works, but I think a combination of between 2 and 3 winged demon princes, 3 Lords Exultants, and 3 units of Infractors, 2 units of Tormentors, 3 units of Noise Marines, between 2 and 3 units of Noise Marines, I think, plus rhinos to carry them to the fight, and then associated utility units. Sometimes we see Spawn in here. Sometimes we see additional Lord Cacophonists as well. There's a little bit of play that can be made within the army, but generally speaking, I think this is what we're going to be seeing for the most part. And the other army to win with Emperor's Children this round is actually almost identical, not quite exactly the same, but very, very, very similar. Now, with that, let's move over to to Richmond in British Columbia in Canada for the West Coast GT. This was a 150-player major. I think 163 registrations. I believe it was 147 actual players. But in any case, the largest event of the weekend this week. And let's stay with this for a little bit and talk about the armies that went undefeated. First off, we had Jeff Jew playing Orks, who I will discuss momentarily. But I want to start with Astra Militarum, since they did it better overall this weekend, and talk about Brandon Kading and his Imperial Guard. Now, Brandon was playing a Hammer of the Emperor detachment. This one is the relatively speed-focused, I would say, detachment that is built around Astra Militarum vehicles. This gives you auto 6 advances on your vehicles and allows them to advance through enemy models. The army was including a Catachin command squad as well as Gaunt's Ghosts for some up-down utility and some out-of-phase orders. Lord Solar Leontis, who I think generally speaking does fairly well in these styles of armored Astra Militarum armies, because he, even without use of a Master Vox, I think he could potentially jump in with the Catachin command squad, but I don't know if that's what we're going to be doing this time around. He doesn't necessarily need to be quite as far forward to issue orders to armored vehicles who are going to be sort of staying in the back in the early game with only his 6-inch natural order radius, whereas if you're playing a more aggressive infantry-focused variety, you'd need a Master Box in order to be consistently giving those units orders, but he can play around Rogel Dorns and things like that just fine. We then, speaking of Rogel Dorns, we have 2 Rogel Dorn tank commanders. One of them has Veteran Crew. This is going to give it hit rerolls of 1. Rogel Dorns also, don't forget, have those that built-in once per activation reroll, so it's going to be relatively consistent, I would say, on that one in particular. The other one, it has Indomitable Steed, which gives it a 6+ feel no pain. So one of the Rogel Dorns is kitted to be a little bit more aggressive. The other one kitted to be a little bit more defensive. Those guys coming in with 18 wounds does mean that Indomitable Steed 6+ feel no pain goes quite a long way. That's essentially 15 points for +3 wounds, which is not terrible, especially on a high toughness, high save unit with access to some pretty good stratagems. That can go a long way, especially when comboed with the -1 damage that the detachment already has. From there, we have a unit of Cadian Shock Troopers in the battle line, so not running the Master Box combo for Lord Solar, since we don't have a command squad to attach in with those guys. We're running the Catachin command squad instead. We do have a ton of transports, however, 4 Toroxes, which do have a lot of synergy with this detachment, and since Toroxes, as their data sheet ability, are able to advance and disembark, especially alongside any pre-game movements like scouting, you can actually just dump units in your opponent's deployment zone, essentially, from turn 1 with these things. You can imagine a 6-inch scout plus their base movement plus a 6-inch advance plus a disembark 3 inches allows you to be putting units like on your opponent's side of the table. You can even add move on top of that from the Rogel Dorn tank commanders or Lord Solar as well, if you can get them in range after that scout move, which gives the total threat distance of these Toroxes. It puts it absolutely astronomical, and potentially also allows them to kind of hold back if they want to play a little bit more defensively and then push in and disembark those troops later on in the game. Now, speaking of those scouts, we do have a lot of those scouts to begin with. We have 2 units of Kazurkin for some high reliability shooting with their built-in orders, as well as some mine activations. We do have the Meltamines on the Kazurkin, but we're also getting 3 sets of remote mines from 3 units of Krieg combat engineers. So some additional scout mine-laying units on top of that. So we have in total potentially 35 scouting infantry that can push up the table. The Catachin command squad doesn't have a unit to join, but it can just apply its 6-inch scout to a transport, so it can embark into the Torox as well and not remove scout from that transport, and then disembark and issue an out-of-phase order on top of that. So that gives you access to another unit that can move forward and disembark, and then also, sort of provide that scout to those transports for that immense amounts of turn 1 sort of threat range. From there, we also have 2 units of Leman Russ Vanquishers, just multi-meltas plus the battle cannon on those guys, and a rattling unit for some infiltration. They also have, as we've talked about in the past, a little bit of synergy with the transports where they can fire and then get back into the transport, so you can infiltrate them to prevent enemies from stopping your scout moves, scout super far forward, advance, disembark the units inside the transport, and then fire the rattlings and re-embark them in the transport to keep them safe and usable for another turn. So the amount of synergy on that sort of Torox rush is incredible. This list is really interesting, especially I think the just pure amount of board presence and scenario control it gives you, especially Astra Militarum, which is an army that oftentimes suffers a little bit in terms of its ability to take board space, is super duper interesting. We have 2 Leman Russ and 2 Rogaldorns that are going to be sitting in the back and pounding at you. However, you can't really deal with them efficiently on the first turn because you have these 40 infantry plus these Tauroxes that are basically already in your deployment zone from turn 1. So your movement's being blocked. You've already absorbed a bunch of mortal wounds and multigun damage from the units themselves. And then you also have to clear that and push forward into 4 Militarum battle tanks that have potential access to -1 damage. Very, very difficult ask. And obviously over the course of the weekend, Brandon Kading found that his opponents were not able to do it. So he was able to go undefeated. Now with that, let's move over to the number 1 placement at the West Coast GT, Jeff Jew, going undefeated with Orks. This time, they've taken our Deka, but they can never take our Krumpen, according to Jeff, because he is playing a Warhorde rather than any of that pansy Mordaka energy. We're just going to be moving up and punching people directly in the face, as Orks are meant to do. This list is running Gaskell Thraka, the big orc himself. He also has a little bit of synergy with the Warhorde detachment in general, because with Makari's Banner, when you WA, you can provide lethal hits. You can then Unbridled Carnage to gain sustained hits thanks to the detachment ability, plus lethal hits from Gaskell Thraka. So you can get 5 up critical lethal sustain on the WOG turn for just 1 CP, which is great. Or you can just use it on a big unit of boys, and then those boys will probably kill whatever they're hitting. So that's a very, very strong combo for Warhorde, and it feels like it's been too long since we've seen Prophet of the WOG on the table. We have 2 Pain Boys as well as 2 standard war bosses, one of them with Follow Me Lads to make his unit faster, the other one with Cunning but Brutal to allow his unit to fall back and charge. From there, we have 2 units of boys where those Pain Boys are going to be attaching into. As I mentioned before, these guys have so many attacks that on the WOG turn, once you are comboing them out, they can actually start to tear down even larger targets that you wouldn't normally expect, and they're not the easiest thing to kill with the Pain Boys attached inside the units, especially on that WOG turn. We have 2 trucks as well as 2 battle wagons to actually carry the boys to the fight, 2 units of 5 flash kits for some utility and a little bit of infantry clearing, a couple of units of Gretchen for some more utility, as well as a Storm Boys unit and 2 units of Tank Bustas. So it does look like the war bosses are going to be jumping into those battle wagons alongside the Orc boys. We don't have dedicated sort of bodyguard units for the war bosses themselves. So instead, what we're going to be doing is following the big Orc boys units around to give them +1 to hit and obviously deliver the war bosses themselves. The trucks are there to carry around the flash kits and the tank bustas in whatever combination the army needs. Now, obviously, I do like the inclusion of these ranged attackers in what is otherwise an entirely melee detachment. That gives the army a lot of flexibility. It forces the opponent to respect the threat range and the damage output of the tank bustas on the first turn, so you can't just sort of deploy willy-nilly and do whatever you want against them. You do have to actually hide yourself and gain cover on turn 1, and these are the styles of builds that we've been see some success from Orks over the last couple of weeks since Mordaka got significantly nerfed. Now with that, let's move over to the Glasshammer Major in Birmingham. This was a 105-player major level event and was won by the great man himself, Josh Roberts, going undefeated with Blood Angels, 6-0. Now, the event did use a top cut, so Vic BJ, unfortunately, with slightly lower tiebreakers. Josh Roberts with look at these 20s. So it's WTC scoring, sort of differential scoring, but so many 20-0s on the record there. That's insane. With Blood Angels making that top cut. Up into what is awkwardly pretty close to his own variety of Ultramarine Gladius Task Force, which I do think is probably not very favorable into a very high pressure list like Blood Angels. I do think that Space Marines, standard Space Marines, like Ultramarines in general, can suffer a little bit against a really high pressure. But we are going to be talking about Josh Roberts' list today because he was the eventual winner of the event. This was a Blood Angels Liberator Assault group, so we are back to our roots with the Index Styles attachment for the Blood Angels faction. That's running a Captain with Rage-Fueled Warrior, the classic combination to kill almost literally anything in the game. This guy can pop both Rage-Fueled Warrior at once per game sustained hits 3, as well as his use of finest hour at the same time. So he's gaining 3 additional attacks. Each of those attacks that rolls a 6 is going to gain 3 additional hits. So the combination of those two things, especially if you can fish for hits on your Oath target, is ludicrous. The amount of damage you can expect from that guy is absolutely crazy, especially if you can source wound rerolls. But oftentimes, he'll just kill whatever he touches without any friends whatsoever. Even if he rolls only a single 6 over the course of his attack, he's coming in with 12 strength 10 hits, which is just by itself pretty good with devastating wounds. We then have a speed of the Primarch Chaplain for +1 to wound, but also to get that once per game fight first. Kind of a Judiciary energy with a little upside, plus a combi weapon, the Lieutenant, for utility. 2 Impulsors to carry around some smaller units, but we do have some large units in the form of 2 units of 10 Jump Pack Assault Intercessors. These guys are very useful just for their sheer maneuverability, move 12, potential advance and charge from the detachment, and the fact that their kind of mediocre chainsword attacks get some of the greatest benefit from the Liberator Assault Group detachment ability. That +2 strength puts them to strength 6, which is an incredible breakpoint for this unit because you start to wound T5 heavy infantry on 3s, and you start to wound especially light infantry T3 enemies on 2s. You also usually get +1 to wound into most vehicles as well. Your T10 vehicles, for example, you start to be wounding on 5s, which is huge. That's most of the kind of midway frontline, like main battle tank style units in the game. So these dudes, so many attacks, so many mortal wounds, so much maneuverability, they're able to kill a lot. We then have another unit of 5 just for utility. We have 2 Ballistic Dreadnoughts for some backline shooting. Just classic stuff, as we've been seeing in most Space Marine lists, plus a trio of Blade Guard veteran squads. So that's probably where our characters are going to be going. Big benefit for the Blade Guard veterans alongside the Captains is that the Blade Guard, when they are on the offense, can put themselves into their reroll 1s to hit mode, and the Captains that are hitting on 2s base get a huge benefit from that. The Blade Guard veterans also gain a huge benefit from the detachment ability, gaining attacks on what is already a fairly high reliability weapon, the AP2 2 damage weapon with reroll 1s to hit effect built in. The extra attack there is nice, and the +2 strength, again, very similar to the Assault Intercessors, puts their mathematical breakpoint at a position where they're going to be winning a lot of stuff on 4s or 5s that they would otherwise have been winning on 5s or 6s, which is a big deal. So these guys, I think, are kind of the most recent technology since they got a points cut in the last update for Blood Angels, because they add that level of resilience, they add that damage output that has a good synergy with the detachment ability, and they also don't break the bank like you would with a unit like Sanguinary Guard. Plus, they can go into transports, which is big by itself. Blade Guard veteran plus a character can go into an impulsor just fine, which is great. That combination of effects, I think, makes them incredibly strong in Liberator Assault Group, which is why we're starting to see them more and more often. We then also, as some additional utility, we have 2 Outriders, 2 units of Outriders, 3 models in each of those units. Those guys have some additional synergy with the detachment ability. Since they're already gaining +1 strength on the charge and +1 damage, they then increase that to a total of +3 strength, +1 damage, and +1 attack. So they're attacking 5 times with a strength 7 2 damage melee attack, which is good all by itself. Plus, they also can act as a utility unit because they just have a high base movement, and they're OC2 apiece. They're kind of difficult to kill. T5 with 4 wounds makes them really awkward to strip away. So they're very good at stealing opponents' objectives too. These guys are probably underrated, I think, currently in a lot of detachments, and especially the detachments that can give them advance and charge or can give them additional damage bonuses so they can clear out very reliably other light infantry and medium infantry off of objectives. Makes them an absolute nightmare for holding down your objectives against this army. And then we have a couple of scout squads and a Stern Guard veteran squad. The Stern Guard veteran squad is actually probably where the Rage Fueled Warrior guy is going to end up, I imagine, because they gain both hit and wound rerolls when targeting their Oath of Moment target. They also contribute that effect to the Captain as well. So when targeting its Oath target, is going to be able to fish for those sustained hits 3, then also fish for devastating wounds on the subsequent melee attacks because he's also gaining wound rerolls there. Sometimes you see this effect from Assault Intercessors. That's obviously the classic combination from the start of the edition. However, Stern Guard veterans do it much more reliably, since all you have to do is target the particular enemy with Oath of Moment to basically almost ensure that it gets one shot by that little silly goober. So if your opponent has any one big scary threat, you can almost certainly kill it with that Stern Guard veteran squad plus the Ragefield Warrior Captain with Oath of Moment once per game whenever you need it to. So those guys can kind of play in the back line. They can shoot a little bit. They can do a little bit of skirmishing. And then as your opponent moves something very valuable forward, you can one-shot it with that combination. So it's a hugely powerful ability to have in the chamber. Now with that, we're going to move over to the GothCon Open in Sweden, an event won by Emil Söder Motorhome, who was playing Deathwatch. Now, again, as I mentioned before, this was a WTC-style scoring event, so it did use these differential scoring, which meant that ties were very common. However, it did go 6 rounds, so it did get down to a single undefeated. However, Emil here had 1 draw on his record. We won't hold that against him, though, since he won all his other games. Technically, went undefeated over the course. Now, Emil was running a Black Spear task force from Deathwatch, and I think we've talked quite a bit about this detachment as things have been progressing. It was kind of expected to come out as the predominant Space Marine force, as people were expecting to see nerfs to Ultramarines. That didn't quite happen, so Ultramarines are still more highly represented, but Deathwatch didn't really go anywhere, and in the March update got buffs. So they got even better, and I think are certainly playing probably like second or third place to Ultramarines currently in the spectrum of the Space Marine super faction, but I definitely think are incredibly strong. So we are running a Captain in Gravis armor with the Tome of the Ectoclades, a Judiciary with Thief of Secrets, which is great for a unit that fights first, so he has a pretty good shot at, in the early game, coming in and generating that kill to power up the Thief of Secrets to then ensure that he can hit harder on subsequent turns. We have then 2 Phobos Lieutenants, which is really interesting. Now moving down the list, we have a unit of Deathwatch Veterans. What's interesting here is that we don't have a Watch Captain, or Watchmaster, to jump into those guys. So they are going to not be advancing, shooting, and charging. They're just going to be ground pounding normally. We then have a standard Intercessor squad. They actually have a little bit of a benefit because they can gain mission tactics potentially, so you can give them a sustain or lethal hits for a CP, firing 20 shots, which is kind of nice. You normally prefer to use that on your kill team units themselves, but in a pinch, if you need to sweep infantry, these guys can do it just fine, especially alongside Oath of Moment. We then have a bunch of Deathwatch Terminator squads, pretty standard stuff, 3 Cycle and Missile Launchers in each of those, alongside 2 Storm Shield guys to take damage. We have 2 Incursor squads, so that's actually, I think, where we are going to be placing our Phobos Lieutenants. That's super interesting. I guess a big benefit there is that it allows you to play a little bit more judiciously, either with fishing for your critical effects, because most of the weapons in the army have lethal hits, or at least the special issue bolter weapons that the units have. So getting +1 to hit from an Incursor squad, but then also being able to fish with a reroll to hit from Oath of Moment for lethal hits makes that +1 to hit go a little bit farther. But it also means that you don't necessarily need to be Oath of Momenting whatever you're shooting at with those guys. Plus, the Incursor squads with the attached Phobos Lieutenants are very fast. They have assaults by themselves, and then they can move after shooting. So they can potentially move very aggressively in order to complete secondaries or get into particularly unique areas of the board. And they're not that expensive either. The Incursor squad at only 80 points plus a 55-point character is 135. That's a lot for a utility unit, but the amount you're getting from that, a unit with assault weapons that grants +1 to wound and is relatively fast by itself and can also, shoot and scoot and keep itself alive in the early games, is actually really interesting. I like that technology. I've never seen that before, but the more I think about it, the more I think I like it. The units that they're buffing, however, those are 2 Indomitor kill teams. These guys each equipped with 2 heavy bolt rifles, 2 heavy bolters, and these are the special Deathwatch heavy bolters that are additional damage, plus a multi-melta, 2 melta rifles, and 3 Flamestorm Gauntlet equipped aggressors. That's pretty classic weapon loadout for the Indomitor kill teams. Oftentimes we see these paired with a Stormspeed or Thunderstrike to buff them up against vehicles. Instead, I guess we're not expecting to see too many vehicles in the metagame this time around, instead using those Incursors so that we can be pretty effective into a variety of targets. Instead, this time comboing them with those Incursors. For some additional utility, we have an Invader ATV with a multi-melta plus a Rhino to carry the Deathwatch Veteran squad around. Really interesting. I like that Incursor play. It's actually a neat evolution of the Black Spear Task Force list, although the rest of the list is relatively standard based on what we've been seeing happen with Deathwatch more recently. Now with that, let's move over to South Carolina to talk about the Nerd Bar Spring GT, a 31-player GT that was won by Aeldari. Colin Watts was playing Aeldari for the 5-0 record at the end here. He was playing Ynnari though, so there's nothing too shocking happening right now. It's just kind of a standard Ynnari build. It is a little bit of a unit spam archetype. We're running some Corsair Void Reavers as well as Storm Guardians this time around. Those are backing up a pair of Autarks with fusion guns and Starglaives plus Yvrain. And then the rest of the list, almost the entire rest of the list, is just Aspect Warriors. We do have a single Wave Serpent to give ourselves a little bit of transport capacity and some maneuverability. And then we have triple Dark Reapers, triple Fire Dragons, double Howling Banshees, double Striking Scorpions, double Swooping Hawks, triple Warp Spiders. And that's the list. We aren't taking the big bricks of stuff, which is interesting. Sometimes we see, obviously, Ynnari playing like the huge brick of fire dragons or huge bricks of Ynnari incubi to make the best use of those lethal intents to maneuver those stuff around the table. This time we are triggering more lethal intents than normal because we have so many units on the battlefield. But obviously, other than that, there's not too much to say about this. I think it's mostly Ynnari stuff that's doing Ynnari things and shooting a lot and moving around. Largely what we've seen in the past. Now, with that, we're going to move over to Hellstorm Wargaming's All-Stars April, being held in the United Kingdom. This was a smaller event, 22 players, but it was won by Tyranids. Mark Layfield taking it down with an invasion fleet, and actually some really interesting tech in this invasion fleet you can see right off the bat here. So we are taking a Hive Tyrant with adaptive biology to make him harder to kill, plus a Narrow Tyrant to give enemies -1 on their Shadow in the Warp tests. Pretty normal stuff, but interestingly here is a Broodlord with Perfectly Adapted. This grants the Broodlord a single floating reroll once per turn, and that can be used on a wide variety of things. That includes hit rolls, wound rolls, damage rolls, advance rolls, or charge rolls. A big downside of the Broodlord in many Tyranid lists outside of Vanguard Onslaught is its relative lack of maneuverability. It's Scout 8 with Move 8, but that's about it, right? Once it's on the battlefield and after the first turn, it doesn't really have any additional threat range enhancers besides just moving 8 inches. However, having a baked-in charge reroll is actually a huge deal. That makes him much more reliable at getting into the fight. Assuming that works. He is going to attach it to a Gene Stealer unit to do that, and the Perfectly Adapted gives a reroll to the bearer specifically, but I assume that carries over to the bearer's attached unit. I'm actually not 100% sure about that. But once he's stuck in, the Broodlord doesn't really need the benefit of Perfectly Adapted because he has essentially full hit and wound rerolls anyway baked in, so he doesn't really get any benefit from that besides using it to defensively reroll saving throws on himself, which is a nice thing to have. Now, moving on from that, we also have a bunch of battle line infantry. We have a Hormigaunt unit for some disruption, as well as a big 20 model Termagant unit to use Endless Swarm on. We have a Biovore for scoring, plus 2 Exocrines, the 10 Gene Stealers that we're attaching that Broodlord into, a pair of Lictors for utility, 1 Maliceptor because it rules, Neurolictor, a single Pyrovore to strip cover from enemies, 2 Tyrannofexes, one with Acid Spray, one with the Rupture Cannon. Bit of a combo between the Pyrovore and the Acid Spray. The weird thing about the Acid is that its AP is okay, but it doesn't ignore cover, so your opponent is probably benefiting from cover when you shoot at them. Having a Pyrovore in there to strip cover from them before you shoot them actually changes the math on that thing quite a bit. Makes it very good at killing good armor save infantry and heavy infantry units and things like that. And then last and certainly not least, a unit of Raveners. A billion attacks for these guys, so they get a great benefit from the Invasion Fleet detachment ability, but also having an up-down unit for scoring is also very important too. Now with that, we're going to move over to Ottawa in Ontario, Canada for the Red Dragon GT, another relatively smaller event. This one was won by Adeptus Custodes. This was a 4-0-1 result with a natural draw, actually, at the end here. So these players, Thomas Cosgrove and Steph Job, I guess, played and drew 87-87 at the end of round 5, which is great. But Thomas Cosgrove was going into that, looks like 4-0 rather than 3-1, so did end up taking the big W here. Thomas was playing a Solar Spearhead with a couple of smaller dreadnoughts, which is actually really interesting. First off, a Contemptor Achilles Dreadnought, so that's the guy with the big spear who's good at fighting. He's taking Adamantine Talisman, so he has +1 strength attacks and damage on his melee attack. We then also have a Telemon Heavy Dreadnought with Augury Uplink to give him a Feel No Pain, the classic thing. From there, we have 3 Caladius Grav Tanks. These aren't dreadnoughts, so they don't get all of the benefits of the detachment ability. They are not affected by the additional movement or advance and charge buffs. However, the detachment is very synergistic with vehicle units to begin with, so they're a good inclusion regardless. It's very difficult to one-shot them, so they very often get that reroll hit roll effect activated once they have started to take damage, and once that's online, their reliability goes through the roof since they're firing that twin-linked blaze cannon, plus they're getting reroll once to hit, which is huge. You can also use stratagems like Unstoppable or Relentless Persecution to improve their maneuverability. Unstoppable allows them to move through walls crawls. You can use it on any vehicle unit, doesn't have to be a walker. And Relentless Persecution allows them to advance and shoot. So they're actually able to maneuver themselves in a lot of directions that you wouldn't normally expect them to, because oftentimes the threat range of a Cladius Grav Tank is very easy to pre-measure, and part of the game of playing against this detachment is trying to limit the number of effective activations that they have. It's very difficult to actually do that in Solar Spearhead because they can, if they need to, be so maneuverable. We then have 2 units of Prosecutors for utility, plus 3 Venerable Contemptor Dreadnoughts, pretty classic for the detachment. Obviously, they got all the detachment abilities. Plus, you got to kill them twice to actually get rid of them, which is usually pretty good. Plus, a pair of Witch Seeker units for some scouting as well. Pretty standard stuff for a Solar Spearhead. It's kind of cool to see the Contemptor Achilles get some play. We don't often see that guy on the battlefield. Usually it's just Telemon Heavy Dreadnoughts and Cladius Grav Tanks for this style of build. But obviously, those guys have to have their time in the sun once in a while. The downside is that they're relatively slow. But if there were a detachment that made them really fast, it is definitely Solar Spearhead for sure. But with that, that is going to be it for the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Thank you so much for watching. But big thanks as well to Adept Roll for sponsoring the video. Go check them out in the links in the video description. Big thanks as well to everybody who supports the channel, obviously, as always, either on Patreon at patreon.com/TacticalTortoise, or those folks over on YouTube membership that you can join down in the link below the video. All you people are amazing, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.